The deal. Jason sat alone in a corner of the spaceport bar, his fingers wrapped around a warm glass of something that smelled stronger than it tasted. He had been there for hours, watching ships come and go, wondering what he would do next. His money was gone, his job was gone, and his dreams had burned out long ago in a cargo ship explosion that had not even made the news. The bar was mostly empty, except for a few old pilots and some shady-looking traders. No one paid attention to him, and he liked it that way, until she walked in. She was tall, her skin smooth and pale with a silver glow under the lights. Her eyes were bright blue like a frozen sea. Her hair flowed like black smoke. She looked almost human, but not quite, and everyone in the room felt it. Something about her made people turn away or look down, like their instincts told them she was dangerous or maybe just too strange to handle. She walked straight toward Jason, her boots making no sound on the metal floor, and sat down across from him without asking. Jason raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She looked at him for a moment, like she was trying to read his thoughts. Then she spoke in a voice soft like music but with a sharp edge underneath. "I need your help," she said, "and I will pay you more than you have ever made in your entire life." Jason leaned back in his chair, amused but curious. He had heard strange things in his time, but this was a new one. He asked her what kind of help she needed, and she said she needed him to pretend to be the father of her unborn child. Jason laughed at first, then stopped when she pulled out a small data chip and placed it on the table. The screen flickered on, and he saw a bank account with more zeros than he could count. She was serious, and suddenly the air around them felt heavier. He asked her why she needed this. Why him? And she looked away for the first time, like the answer hurt more than she wanted to admit. She said her people were strict and traditional, and if they found out the child had no father, they would take it away. She needed a name, a story, a human man who could act the part just long enough to fool her society, and then he could leave with the money. Jason thought she was insane, but the numbers on the screen kept flashing in his mind. Enough money to buy a new ship, start a new life, maybe fix what he had broken. Still, he asked the one question that kept buzzing in his mind. Is it really mine? She paused, then said no. The child was not his, but he was compatible, genetically, close enough to make the lie believable. And most importantly, he was unknown to her people. No records, no ties. A ghost in the system. Jason looked at her again, this time really looking, and saw the fear behind her calm face. Not fear for herself, but for the child, whatever this was. It mattered to her, and for reasons he could not explain. It started to matter to him too. He said yes, more out of instinct than logic, and she nodded, pulling out a small glowing orb from her coat. She told him it was a contract, biological and legal in her culture. It would bind them for 1 Earth year. After that, he would be free with his payment. Jason hesitated, then placed his hand on the orb. It lit up and hummed softly, scanning his body without warning. Something pricked his skin, and a cold wave passed through his spine. He pulled his hand back quickly and asked what just happened. She said it was just a DNA lock, to make sure the contract was real, but her voice was too calm, too rehearsed, and Jason felt a small knot forming in his chest. They left the bar together, walked through the lower levels of the spaceport, passing old metal walls and flickering lights. They reached a ship docked in a private bay, sleek and dark, shaped like a bird of prey. Jason had never seen tech like it inside the ship. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Walls smooth like glass, lights that moved like water. He followed her down a narrow hall to a small room where she asked him to wait. He sat down, looked around, and realized how strange his life had just become. He touched his palm where the orb had scanned him. The skin was warm, slightly glowing. He did not like that. A soft sound came from the wall, and a screen flickered on, showing a strange image. A small floating pod, and inside it, a baby. Not born yet, not human, but not fully alien either. It moved slowly in the liquid, and then, for just a second, it opened its eyes. Jason jumped back, Because the eyes were exactly like his, the hidden truth. The ship moved silently through deep space, its engine softer than a whisper. Jason stood by the window, watching the stars slip past like falling sparks. He had been on many ships before, rusty freighters, cold cargo haulers, even a military escort once. But this one was different. This one felt. Alivisaria stood behind him, her arms crossed, her face calm but her energy tense. She told him they were heading toward a neutral zone far from any known system, a hidden place where no one would ask questions. Jason didn't ask why she needed to hide, not yet, but the question sat heavy in his mind like a rock in water. He turned to her and asked again about the baby. How it could have eyes like his. She looked at him with those glowing blue eyes and said the child was a hybrid, part of her and part human. Jason laughed nervously, reminding her the contract said the child wasn't his. Soraya nodded slowly and said that was true, but only from one point of view. Jason sat down, his head spinning. He had signed up for a lie, but now it was feeling like a truth he didn't understand. She explained that her people had technology that could grow life from compatible DNA. They had used his genetic material, not through contact but through old samples stored in illegal black market banks. Jason's name had been on a corrupted list, a forgotten record from a medical scan years ago. Sold without his knowledge. He wanted to get angry, to shout, to walk away, but he was already in deep space, trapped with a woman who said his genes were now inside a child not yet born. The thought made his stomach twist, yet somehow, part of him didn't hate that. Soraya led him down the hall into a lower chamber, the walls dimmed, lights glowing faintly. As they stepped closer to the center where a tall oval pod floated. Inside it, the child drifted in soft blue liquid, tiny hands moving gently, its heart beating in rhythm with the hum of the ship. Jason stared in silence, unsure if he should feel wonder or fear. She said the child was already growing faster than expected, its mind active, dreaming, learning, even inside the womb. She said the child had spoken to her through thought, and once it had called her by his name. Jason, he stepped back, unsure what that meant. Soraya explained that the child was not just a mix of two species. It was something new, something rare. Her people would never accept it. They would see it as a threat, or worse, as a weapon. If the child was born without protection, it would be taken, studied, or destroyed. That was why she needed him, not just as a name, but as a shield. Jason didn't answer. He just kept staring at the small shape inside the pod. Something about it called to him, not in words, but in feeling, as if the child knew him already, trusted him, wanted him close. Later that night, Jason sat alone in the observation deck, stars blinking outside like silent eyes. He thought about his old life, broken ships, broken promises, drifting from planet to planet without meaning. Now here he was, caught in a secret bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Saria came and sat beside him, quiet for a long time. Then she began to speak about her past, how her kind had once ruled a part of the galaxy with power and fear, how their enemies had nearly wiped them out, how the survivors now lived in silence and secrecy, hiding their bloodlines, fearing change. She said she had once been part of the council, powerful, respected, until she fell in love with something forbidden, the idea of mixing with another kind, of creating life beyond the old laws. When she discovered she was with child, they exiled her, called her traitor. Some even tried to kill her. Jason listened, unsure what to feel. This woman who had once stood on high towers was now sleeping in shadows, all for a child that should never have existed. And now that child was part of him, part of his blood, even if he had never known it. Suddenly, the lights flickered, the ship rumbled slightly. Soraya stood up fast, her voice calm but sharp. Something was wrong. She moved to the control panel, her fingers tapping quickly. Her face went pale. She said another ship had found them, a signal from behind, and it was not friendly. Jason ran to the window. Far behind them, a small shape appeared, dark and fast, closing in without speaking. Saraya said they had to hide. They had to protect the baby. Jason nodded, fear rising in his throat, but also something else. Something like purpose. He followed her down to the control bay. The ship turned sharply, stars spinning outside. Saraya activated a cloaking system that made the vessel vanish from sensors. Jason held onto the rail, breathing hard, feeling the weight of the moment press into his chest as the enemy ship passed over them, unaware. A soft sound came from deep below, the child's pod glowing slightly brighter. Jason felt it again, a whisper in his mind. Not a word, not a sentence, just one clear feeling. It was afraid. Hunted. This silence after the enemy ship passed was sharp like a blade in the dark. Jason stood still, gripping the wall rail, his breath slow and shallow while Saraya stared at the screen, her eyes glowing brighter than before. Her fingers moved quickly across the console, locking system, sealing doors, rerouting power. Nothing left to chance. Jason finally asked who they were, why they were hunting her, and how they knew where to look. Saraya hesitated, then said a name under her breath, a name Jason did not recognize, but it made the room feel colder. The name was Verith, a warlord from her own people, someone she once trusted, someone who now wanted the child more than anything else in the galaxy. Jason asked if Verith was the father, but Saraya shook her head and said no, the father was someone else, someone lost before the child was even formed, someone who never knew the child existed. Jason didn't ask more because he could see it in her face, a pain too deep for words. The ship stayed hidden for hours, floating near a dead moon where no signals could bounce back. Jason paced the halls, trying to clear his mind, but it kept returning to the same place. The child, the pod, the way it had looked at him or thought at him. That strange moment when he felt something inside his mind shift, like he had been touched from the inside out. He walked into the pod room and stood there staring at the small form floating inside. The glass, its tiny fingers curled gently, its chest rising, falling in soft rhythm. And then it happened again, the soft voice in his head, the whisper without sound, the feeling without language. It wasn't a sentence, but it had meaning, and that meaning was fear and trust, and something that felt almost like hope. Jason reached out and placed a hand on the glass. The pod glowed faintly, the liquid shimmered, and the child shifted gently as if it knew he was there behind him. Saraya spoke, her voice low and distant. She said the child's mind was evolving fast, too fast. It was already connecting to them through thought, through memory, through emotion. Jason turned to her and asked what that meant, if it was dangerous, if the child was going to become something they couldn't control. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over and looked at the pod, her eyes soft, her voice barely above a whisper. She said the child was not dangerous, but others would see it that way because they didn't understand, because they were afraid of what they couldn't shape or own or kill. Jason asked what Verith wanted to do with the child. Saraya said he would raise it as a weapon, twist its power for war, use its gifts to control both humans and her people alike. The child was a symbol of peace, but Verith saw it as a tool of domination. That was why they could never let him find it. Suddenly, the ship lights flickered again, and this time, alarms began to hum low and sharp. Saraya rushed to the control room. Jason followed. The screens were flashing red, and a new ship had entered the dead zone. It was not Verith, but a human vessel marked with no flag, no ID, Black Ops type. Jason had seen this before. These were the silent hands of Earth government, the ones who cleaned up what others weren't supposed to know about. Saraya said nothing, but her face turned hard. She activated evasive protocols, and the ship dived low through asteroid debris, silent and swift. Jason took a seat and held on as the ship twisted through sharp turns, chasing shadows and hiding between frozen rocks. He looked at Saraya and asked how they found them again. She didn't look at him when she said maybe the DNA contract had been traced, maybe someone sold information, maybe the child had reached out to the wrong mind. Maybe Jason himself had been marked long ago, and only now the galaxy noticed. They couldn't stay there any longer. Saraya said there was a planet not far from here, forgotten, unclaimed, wrapped in clouds and storms. A good place to hide for now. They shifted course, the engines humming low, the stars bending around them. Jason returned to the pod room. The child was still inside, still silent, still sleeping, but Jason knew it, could hear him, feel him. He whispered to it, promised to protect it, even though he didn't know how, even though he wasn't sure he could, even though he didn't understand why he cared so much. Soraya joined him after a while. She stood beside him and said that he had changed since the moment he touched the pod. His mind had become clearer, more focused. She asked if he had dreams. Jason nodded slowly. He told her about the dream he had seen last night, where he stood on a cliff holding the child, looking up at 3 moons as they exploded into stars. Soraya said she had seen that place too in a dream years ago, before the child was even real. Jason stared at her, trying to understand how that could be. She didn't give him answers, only more questions. She said the child was not just born from them, but was connected to something older, something deeper, a pattern written into stars and minds in moments before time even began. Before Jason could ask more, the ship jerked again, warning signals blinking. They were entering the storm zone around the forgotten planet. Winds howled outside, lightning cracked across the clouds. Soraya said this was the only chance they had to vanish completely. Jason nodded, gripped the rail, and looked at the pod once more as the baby opened its eyes in the glowing liquid and smiled. The child is special. The storm clouds wrapped around the ship like thick smoke, swallowing everything outside. In darkness and light, the winds were wild, but the ship moved steady, guided by Soraya's calm hands, her eyes glowing brighter than before as she focused on every shift, every pulse of gravity, every crack of lightning, trying to keep the child safe, hidden and alive. Jason stood there, the pod holding the edge of the wall, his knuckles white, his breath slow. The planet below was a violent place, covered in gas storms and mountains of ash, with no cities, no satellites, no voices, just silence and chaos. And that made it perfect for hiding, perfect for survival. They landed the ship on a floating rock platform, a natural shelf, drifting high in the clouds, shielded from satellites and sensors. And Soraya powered down everything except the pod room, which still glowed softly, casting blue light across the chamber, where the child rested like a small star, breathing calmly in its warm glass world. Jason stayed there for hours, just watching the tiny life floating inside, arms stretching, legs moving, eyes flickering beneath lids, like the child was dreaming of places that had never existed and would never be forgotten. Soraya entered quietly and sat beside him, her voice soft, her presence lighter. Now, like the storm had taken something from her and left something else behind, something more human, more real. She told Jason the child was changing faster than before, its body adapting, its mind expanding, connecting to energy around them, like it could read the wind and feel the lightning. Jason asked how that was possible, and Soraya said the child was made from something ancient, not just DNA, but memory, old memory, buried in both species, something deeper than biology, something written in the stars, long before ships and wars and laws. Jason leaned in closer to the pod, touched it, gently felt a pulse beneath the glass, a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. And for a second he swore he could feel the child breathing with him, not apart from him, but as if their lungs moved in sync. And something inside him shifted again, like a quiet door opening. He turned to Soraya and asked what she saw in him, why she picked him, why his DNA was the one chosen. And she looked at him with sadness in her smile and said she didn't pick him, the child did. Jason didn't understand. He asked again, and Soraya explained that when the project began, when she first touched the illegal database and searched for a donor, the system locked onto him instantly, not because of physical traits, but something else, something unknown even to her, something the child recognized even before it existed. He sat back, heart heavy, mind racing, memories flooding in of his life before, of moments that made no sense, now somehow fitting together as if something had always been watching, waiting, calling. Then the lights flickered again and the pod glowed so bright Jason had to shield his eyes. Soraya stood quickly, alarmed but not afraid, and the child opened its eyes wide, golden and full of light, staring not at the room but into them, into their Minds Jason staggered back as the voice returned, not a whisper this time, but a wave, not loud but deep like music underwater. The child spoke to them not in words, but in feelings raw and pure. Jason felt warmth, first like sunlight on skin, then sadness like loss without reason, then something sharp like truth cutting through his doubts, and finally love, not weak, not soft, but strong like fire held in gentle hands. Saraya knelt beside the pod, her hands on the glass, her face calm, but tears running down her cheeks. She said the child was speaking the truth of its soul, and it had chosen Jason, not just for the line, not for protection, not for the story they told the world, but because it knew him, it remembered him from a time before time, from a place neither of them could name. Jason tried to speak but couldn't know. Words would come, his voice trapped beneath the weight of something bigger than language. He just nodded, slowly touched the pod again, and whispered inside his own mind that he would stay, he would protect the child no matter what came. The room fell quiet. The storm outside softened as if the planet itself listened and rested, and the child closed its eyes again, returning to its dream, not alone, not afraid, just waiting. Later, Jason sat alone near the edge of the ship, watching the storm roll by, slow and endless like waves across a forgotten sea. He thought about his life, about how he had once felt empty and small. Now he felt full and heavy and strangely calm, like something finally made sense. Saraya joined him, wrapped in a dark cloak, her face tired but strong, and she said quietly that soon the others would find them, the hunters, the governments, the ones who feared what the child could become, and that they had to move again soon. Before the storm cleared and the stars above revealed their light, Jason nodded and said he understood, but he would not run forever. He said the child would not grow up hiding or fearing or chained to the past, and Saraya looked at him like she had never seen him before and said maybe the prophecy was true after all. Maybe the child was not the first sign of change. Maybe Jason was inside the pod. The child opened its eyes one more time, golden and soft and full of stars. The betrayal, the sky above the sci-fi storm planet cracked with violet light as Jason stood near the landing ramp, boots pressed into metal slick with cloud rain, his eyes scanning the endless fog. Saraya had gone silent since the last message arrived, a signal from deep space, encrypted, strange, marked with a code she refused to explain. Jason had watched her pace back and forth across the control room. Her hands clenched, her jaw tight, her mind far away. And when he asked what it meant, she only said it was someone from before, someone who should have been dead, someone who now wanted to speak face to face. They argued for hours, voices rising, echoing through the ship, until the child began to stir again, light spilling from the pod. Not bright this time, but dim and pulsing like a warning, like a heartbeat in panic. Jason touched the glass, whispered to the child, asked it to calm, to wait, to trust, and slowly the glow settled into soft blue again. Saraya finally spoke, her voice low, her shoulders heavy. She said she had called for help a long time ago, before she met Jason, before the pod was complete, before the child began to grow. She had sent a signal into the black, hoping someone would come, someone she once loved, someone who betrayed her but who still might save her. If he ever felt anything at all, Jason felt cold inside his chest. He asked her if she meant Vareth, the warlord, the hunter, chasing them from system to system, and Saraya looked away, eyes shadowed. She said yes, but not just that. He was more than a soldier, more than an enemy. Once he had been her protector, her partner, her hope, and when the council turned on her, he was the one who gave her the escape key. Jason stepped back, heart pounding, mind spinning. He asked her if the child was his, if all of this was a setup, and Saraya turned sharply, eyes fierce, her voice cracked. She said no. Vareth was not the father. He never touched the child, but he believed he was owed something. He believed the child belonged to the cause, to the empire, to the vision they once shared, and that was why he could not be trusted. Jason stared at her, trying to find truth in her face, but everything now felt thin, like glass stretched too far. The ship groaned around them, wind slamming against the hull, a sound like the planet itself was warning them. That night a ship appeared through the storm, black and sleek and quiet. It docked without sound, without broadcast, and when the doors opened, Vareth stepped through, tall in silver armor, face scarred, eyes glowing red with tech implants and years of battle behind him. He walked into the ship like he owned it, his voice smooth, his posture calm, and when he saw Saraya he smiled, not with joy, but with memory and sorrow. He said she looked older, and she said he looked the same, which meant he had changed. Jason stood between them, fists tight, shoulders raised, but Saraya told him to wait, told him not yet, not now, not until they knew what Vareth truly wanted, and Vareth said he wanted the child not to hurt, not to steal, but to protect. He said enemies were coming, greater than humans, greater than councils, creatures from deep space with no face, no name, no mercy, and the child was the only one who could stand between the galaxy and extinction. Jason believed him, not because the story was too big, but because the man telling it was too small. Something about Varetha's voice felt rehearsed, something about his eyes felt hollow. Later, Saraya met Jason in the pod room, her face pale, her hands shaking. She said she didn't know what to do. She said if they left now they would be hunted, if they stayed they would be betrayed, and Jason asked her if she still trusted him, if anything between them had ever been real. She didn't answer, but she looked at the child, and Jason understood the answer wasn't in words. The next morning Jason woke to the sound of metal shifting, heavy boots on the floor. He ran to the pod room and found it empty, the glass shattered, the liquid drained. Saraya gone, Vareth gone, only a message burned into the wall in alien script, and Jason dropped to his knees reading it through clenched teeth. "We are saving the child from weakness," Jason roared, and the ship responded, lights flaring, engines waking, systems online. He didn't wait for logic, he didn't ask permission, he set coordinates toward the dark, toward the path Vareth had taken, toward the last signal trace Saraya had received, and he swore he would find them, he would find her, and he would bring the child home somewhere in the stars, on a hidden ship in a quiet room. Saraya held the child close, her arms wrapped tight, her tears silent as Vareth stood in the corner, watching, not speaking, not touching, just watching, and the child opened its golden eyes again, but this time it did not smile. The war for the child. The stars above were quiet, but Jason heard war in them as he stared through the ship's glass, watching light stretch into trails. His hands gripped the pilot controls tighter than needed. His jaw clenched, his mind burning with only one purpose: to get the child back and find out why Saraya left without saying goodbye. Ship moved fast through forgotten paths, hidden gates, and uncharted routes. Jason had stolen them from Saraya's system before she left. He didn't know how to read half of them, but he trusted his instinct now more than any map behind his eyes. The child's voice still echoed, not words, just pulses, flashes of memory, visions that were not his, but felt like they belonged to him. A soft hand reaching, a bright light, breaking a face that looked like Saraya, but older, stronger, and then shadows. Always shadows closing in. He arrived at a broken moon, where the last signal led him, clouds of dust floating like ghosts around a metallic station built inside the rock, its walls black and humming with cold energy. He landed quietly, no alarms triggered, no welcome scent, just silence and darkness inside. He walked alone, rifle in hand, boots echoing through narrow halls. Old banners hung from rusted beams, symbols of Saraya's people, now torn and burned and forgotten. He passed rooms with shattered windows and scorched walls, signs of battles fought in silence, battles that left no heroes. He found the chamber at the center, lit by a single blue flame, and there she stood, Saraya holding the child, her body wrapped in armor, her eyes not surprised, not angry, not afraid, just tired, and behind her stood Vareth, calm as ever, hands folded, eyes glowing, watching Jason like a teacher watching a test unfold. Jason raised his weapon, told them to give him the child, told them this was not how it should end. Saraya whispered that it wasn't ending, it was beginning, and Vareth stepped forward, speaking of war, of prophecy, of the child's role in a future none of them could escape. Jason said he didn't care about destiny, he only cared about the child being free, and Saraya's face softened, but didn't change. He said the child had power now, enough to feel fear across galaxies, enough to break things just by dreaming, and if it was not guided, it would be destroyed by those who feared it or it would destroy itself. Chamber lights pulsed as the child stirred, its golden eyes opening wide, its hand reaching out toward Jason, and in that instant time slowed, memories flooded into Jason's mind, his past unraveling moments. He had forgotten moments that never happened or hadn't, yet people calling his name, voices from a time that never existed and a place that wasn't real but always was. He dropped to his knees, breath gone, chest shaking. He saw himself holding the child, not today, not now, but years from now, on a green planet with 2 suns and laughter in the air, and Soraya standing beside him, not as a fugitive, not as a warrior, but as someone whole. Then the vision cracked, the image shattered, and Jason was back in the cold chamber, heart racing, eyes burning, and the child was crying soft and deep, and the walls around them began to shake. Vareth stepped forward, shouting that this was the sign. This was the beginning of what he had always said would come, and he reached for the child. But Soraya blocked him, her body between them, her voice sharp and fierce. She said, "No," she said. "The child chooses, and the child chooses now." The energy around the pod flared bright blue, then deep gold, then white, like a storm of stars trapped in a glass cage. The wind howled without air, the lights shattered without sound, and Jason crawled forward through the storm, reaching, and the child reached back. Their hands touched, and the storm stopped. Silence fell like a blanket, heavy and full. Jason stood holding the child pressed against his chest, its tiny hands clutching his shirt, its eyes closed but peaceful. And Soraya smiled, the first real smile he had seen on her face since the day they met. Vareth stepped back, hands shaking, voice lost, and Jason looked at him, not with hate, but with something close to pity, and said it was over. Not just the chase, not just the war, but the idea that the child belonged to anyone but itself. They left the station in silence, Soraya beside him, the child asleep in his arms, and behind them, the moon cracked further, slowly collapsing into dust and echoes. They flew without a destination, without a plan, only a promise that this time they would choose their own path and not follow the one written by fear or power. And as they drifted into the dark, the child whispered again in Jason's mind, this time with more clarity than ever before. Not fear, not pain, but one word, simple and strong: home. The truth beyond stars. The stars stretched endlessly before them, like rivers of light flowing through black velvet, and Jason sat near the main deck of the ship, holding the child close, wrapped in a soft blanket, humming a melody he did not remember learning, but the child seemed to know it as if it was a lullaby carried across life. Soraya stood near the navigation console, her fingers tracing new coordinates, not of escape this time, not of hiding or survival, but of searching for a place not marked on any map, a place that might not exist in space, but only in hearts. Jason watched her from a distance, felt the weight of everything they had survived, the betrayals, the hunts, the impossible truths. Still they were here, still breathing, still together, still carrying a child the galaxy was never meant to know. The child had grown faster than expected, not in size, but in presence, its thoughts clearer, its feelings stronger. It no longer cried in fear, now it reached out in peace. Sometimes Jason would wake in the night with visions of worlds he had never seen. Planets covered in gold grass, cities floating above oceans, moons wrapped in song, and always the child was there, walking before him, smiling, guiding, glowing. They landed on a world not found on any chart, a green-blue orb wrapped in clouds with no name, no claim, no walls. The trees moved like they were alive, not just growing, but listening, and when they stepped onto the soft soil, Jason felt something shift, not just in the air, but inside his bones. They built a home with their hands, not from metal, but from stone and wood, shaped by touch, warmed by the sun, and cooled by wind. And each night they would sit by the fire and tell stories, not of war, not of fear, but of things they hoped to see, things they wanted the child to believe. Soraya told Jason the child had changed fate, not just theirs, but the universe itself. She said there were patterns older than stars, rules written by ancient minds that even she had once believed, but the child had bent those rules by simply being alive. Jason asked what that made them now, what they were supposed to do, and she smiled quietly and said they were no longer fugitives or liars or guardians. They were witnesses to something greater, something beginning. Time moved differently on that world. Days were longer, nights deeper, filled with stars that whispered songs Jason could not explain, and sometimes the child would look up and raise its hand, and the wind would follow and the stars would blink in rhythm. Then one day the sky cracked open, not with thunder, not with warships, but with light, a single beam descending from above, and Soraya stepped outside without fear. Jason followed the child in his arms, and watched as the light took shape into a figure, not man, not machine, not beast, but something in between, made of light and shadow and memory. The figure spoke without sound, and Jason heard it say that the child had called not with words, but with being, that its presence had reached beyond galaxies, beyond the edge of space and time. And something had answered. Zaria bowed her head and asked if they were to be judged, but the figure shook its form gently and said no. This was not judgment, this was acknowledgement, this was awakening, this was the door opening. Jason held the child tighter, felt a warmth spread through his arms, and the child opened its golden eyes, smiled not at him, not at the figure, but at the sky itself. The light faded slowly, and the figure vanished, leaving behind a single stone, smooth and dark, etched with a symbol that neither Soraya nor Jason could read. But the child reached out, touched it, and laughed, and the stone glowed softly before fading into the earth. After that, things changed, not suddenly, but gently, like dawn breaking through fog. The planet seemed to breathe with them. Flowers grew in colors no one had names for. Creatures emerged from the forest with eyes like mirrors and songs in their chests, and Jason felt peace, not the peace of silence or stillness, but of truth, of belonging. One night Jason sat beneath a silver tree, the child sleeping in his lap, Soraya beside him, her head on his shoulder, and he looked at the sky and whispered that he never expected this, never asked for it, never believed he could be part of something so impossible and yet so real. Soraya whispered back that love was not always chosen. Sometimes it found you, sometimes it built itself from broken things and called you. Father Jason smiled, ran a hand through the child's soft hair, and felt a small hand wrap around his finger, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as fugitives, not as experiments, not as weapons, but as family. The stars above burned brighter than ever, and Jason knew now that they were not just lights in the sky, not just burning gas, but memories of lives lived, of choices made, of futures waiting. And he felt ready for them all. And somewhere across the galaxy, others looked up too, feeling something shift, not knowing why, not knowing where. Just sensing a change in the current of the universe, a quiet signal that something new had begun. And in that moment, the child opened its eyes and whispered one word into the air, a word so soft, so clear, so powerful, it made the stars pause in their motion. Hope.